difference between something real and something created to deceive them.
Open your eyes.
If you've ever had this feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world that we live in, but you couldn't figure out just what it was, then you've come to the right place. Secret societies, mystery religions, and the Illuminati have been controlling our reality since the beginning of time. But not anymore, because there is an awakening happening, and you are about to become a part of it. Wake up, because this is a call for an uprising.
Beginning February 1st, at airports nationwide, it might cost you an extra $45 to fly without a real ID. TSA now bumping the cost up after announcing last week it would cost travelers $18.
The fee was necessary because we needed to modernize the system. We needed to make sure that the system is safe.
Flyers without a real ID can pay the fee online before arriving at TSA checkpoints. They'll get an email to present to the TSA officer.
So if you get to the airport and you don't have a real ID or another acceptable form of ID, and you haven't gone through the online verification process, and you happen to make it all the way to the TSA checkpoint there, they may pull you out of line and go through a verification process that could take up to 30 minutes and cost you $45.
TSA officials say that fee covers the costs of modernizing the agency's identity verification program, which will be used to analyze a traveler's biographic or biometric information to verify their identity. But even then, it's not guaranteed they'll get through security.
It's really all about security. It's really all about making sure that we have the safest system and making sure that we know who's processing through our airports and getting on board our flights.
Well, that $45 fee will cover TSA checkpoint access for a 10-day period and can be used multiple times in that period. TSA officials say the best way to avoid the fee and any possible delay at the airport is to get a real ID.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. TSA is now threatening a $45 fee for travelers who do not have a real ID, as you heard. And of course, making your day even more difficult than the $50 fee is getting pulled out of line for about 30 additional minutes so that you could miss your flight. Remember when the government told us that the real ID was going to be voluntary? Well, that evaporated pretty quickly. Now, why did that happen? Because nobody was signing up for the real ID. I covered it at the time. They were telling you there was lines around the block to get a real ID. People were not complying. So now the government is forcing your hand by threatening you. It's almost like when the government told us that they would create a vaccine for an imaginary virus, a vaccine that would end up shedding onto other people and making them ill, and in fact, terminally killing a lot of people as well. And the government said, hey, look, we're going to have a vaccine. The vaccine is going to come out. All you got to do is go get vaccinated once and you could return to normal, right? And then all those suckers went and got vaccinated once. And then one vaccine turned into two vaccines, and it turned into 2 boosts and 3 boosts and 4 boosts. And then the government even came out and said, hey, did you know that vaccines don't make you immune to a virus? People who didn't get the vaccine aren't allowed to live in society anymore. They're not allowed to have jobs anymore. They're not allowed to live normal lives anymore. In fact, we're going to start banning them from restaurants, from grocery stores. That was the plan that they had in place. And of course, that's because they always give you the illusion that these things are voluntary, just like the digital ID will be voluntary until, of course, it's mandated. Just like, well, you don't have to switch to a smartphone. You can still have a flip phone until, of course, all those big DARPA companies like Verizon and AT&T tell you that you can't have a flip phone anymore. And for people out there wondering what's the detriment with the real ID, because what they do is they show you this image of a license and they go, look, the only difference is, look, there's a little check mark at the top. It says real ID on it. So that's the only difference. And the sheep will go, oh, that's the real difference. These people are conspiracy nuts who don't want a real ID. What's the difference? It's like getting a new license, right? No, what it's about is biometrics. This is the transition into biometrics. It's more than just facial recognition that they are after. This is the biometric beast system. And if I told you in the past, imagine I told you that, because biometrics really is the equivalent of, getting fingerprinted, right? It's like facial biometrics is geometric measurements of facial features. So they take a deep image of your face, the little crevices in your face, every little detail imaginable. They don't just take a photograph of your face and say cheese like they do at the DMV normally for an old license. If I told you when you got a license 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, that you'd have to be fingerprinted for your license, you'd say absolutely not. That's what this is the equivalent of, right? Now, we know that people get fingerprinted for certain jobs, being around children, so that the government could see if the people have a criminal record, if they've ever been arrested, if they have any, if they're in the police database, right? Well, now they want us all in one system, and this is the biometric system they're transitioning us into. And of course, the real ID eventually becomes the digital ID, and that's what people need to understand. The real ID, what they're doing here is they're forcing you by making your life inconvenient, by saying, hey, you have a trip coming with your family. You guys are going to CIA Disney, or you going down, you going to California. Where you go? You going to national parks? All right, well, if you're coming to the airport with a family of 4, each one of you is going to pay $50 in fees. Okay, so you still might bring your passport, but we're going to make you pay $50 in fees because your passport's no longer good enough, because you're making our life a hassle, right? Suddenly, it's a hassle for the TSA and everybody at the airport to allow you on the plane. They're so full of crap. This is about big tech biometric surveillance system. It's the biometric digital ID grid that they're building out, and this is the first step in transitioning us into a one system biometric surveillance state. Now, where does it go from here? Because again, when we talk about the mark of the beast and we talk about a digital ID, it's different than the real ID. The real ID is the beginning of normalizing biometrics. You giving up your facial recognition, your facial metrics to Big Brother, where they could store it inside of one massive database, right? Remember, all that other stuff that's going into those data centers is everything you've ever done, everything you've written online. Every tracker that's been on your phone will show every location you've ever been, every single location you've been with your car. If your car has a camera, everything that's ever been seen with your car, all of it's going to be stored for your own personal digital footprint that are going to be inside of these databases. But the transition from here is into the blockchain. So for anyone out there that doesn't know, you've heard blockchain, you've heard Bitcoin. I'm sure some of you dabble in crypto. Maybe you invest in it to make money. But really, there's not a huge mass understanding of what it is. People just hear Bitcoin and they think, oh, digital currency. They hear blockchain and they have no idea what it is. So let me explain how this is going to tie into blockchain, because the goal here is a digital database. Okay, it's a ledger that is distributed among the nodes of a peer-to-peer network. The blockchain is going to store pretty much anything that could be represented as data. For example, yes, currency, cryptocurrency, digital currency, tokens, all metadata, all digital assets, all ownership records inside of a blockchain, okay? So that means all things you own, right? Your car, your home, whatever valuables you have, all of this data is going to be stored in a blockchain. Everything you've written online, all of your health information, and then all other things like who you voted for. All of those types of things will go inside of the blockchain. But the goal isn't to just have a blockchain. The blockchain is going to be embedded in your DNA. As crazy as that sounds, you could look it up for yourself. Okay, they have been, and they've already got this ready to go. They pretend like, well, we can't afford it, because they know that people won't accept hearing this yet. That's why they have to transition you into things like biometric facial surveillance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually, as we remove generation from generation from generation, as they get more indoctrinated with technology, they'll be more open and accepting to having things underneath their skin, embedded in their genetic code. That's what the mRNA is about. I've always talked about this with gene editing, right? So you can even do any type of deep dive. You want to do a deep dive with AI, you want to do a deep dive on your own, you want to do a deep dive at a library, go look about embedding blockchains in the DNA. They even claim hybrid DNA blockchain system where DNA acts as a biological storage medium for blockchain-like structure, storing blockchain data in synthetic DNA. So DNA isn't just for biology, it's emerging as a molecular storage medium for digital data, including blockchain ledgers. Binary data from a blockchain can be encoded into DNA's 4 bases, synthesized into physical strands, and later read via sequencing. This creates a tamper-proof, ultra-durable archive. DNA lasts thousands of years in cool, dry conditions. This is going to be in you. As insane as it sounds, as hard as it is to understand and fathom, they expect, when they talk about personalized vaccines and all these other things, They expect to edit your genetic code and edit blockchain inside of you, a digital wallet where all this data is you, and it's all going to be stored in you, and it's going to be unhackable, they'll tell you, but of course, it's going to be very easily hackable for them. And I talked about this a couple of years ago when discussing everything that was going on with the COVID vaccine. They're embedding blockchain in biological DNA. That's what's going on. That's what all of this stuff is about. We have Life Code in China, blockchain for personal genomic data ownership, stores hashes on chain full data off chain with smart contracts for sharing, ensures permanent storage and prevents leaks. It's hard for people to get. So let's look at it from this standpoint. When we talk about the mark of the beast, being able not being able to buy or sell without the mark. Start thinking in terms of the future of what stores are going to look like and the future of purchasing things online and the Internet of Bodies. We've all seen the Amazon Go store where you can walk in and out and everything's done through biometric surveillance. The cameras spot your face. The cameras watch what you pick up. That's what the future looks like. But you're going to be what's scanned. Your body is going to be scanned. They're going to be able to scan you just in the blink of an eye, based on your DNA and your genetic code, to know who you are, where you've been, what you have, what you don't have, what you can buy, what you can't buy, and what you do say and what you don't say online. And I talked about this a couple of years ago because we all know that they use humor to start normalizing this stuff. And a couple of years ago, there was a story out there about these companies that wanted to inject Bitcoin into a mouse's DNA. And people were like, what? That's crazy. The plan to put Bitcoin in mouse DNA with a genetically engineered virus. And Stephen Colbert brought this up. Think about that. Putting Bitcoin in mouse DNA with a genetically engineered virus. That sound familiar? Does it sound like a test run that was just done? And they put this out on Colbert's show, and everybody in the audience didn't even know what he was talking about. But then they use a little humor at the end, a little corny joke about, a Bitcoin mouse being a douche mouse. And everybody in the crowd, like the sheeple they are, just start laughing. They laugh at the notions because they can't wrap their heads around what the government and big tech DARPA are trying to do. This was on Colbert back in 2022.
Meanwhile, if you're worried you are beginning to understand too much about the world, good news. There's a plan to put Bitcoin in mouse DNA with a genetically engineered virus. Okay, here's the plan. As you may know, a Bitcoin wallet can only be accessed using its private key. So they will buy some Bitcoin, then tie the mouse's value to that Bitcoin by editing the mouse's genetic code to carry the private key that controls the Bitcoins. This manipulation will result in genetically engineering the world's first douche mouse.
So the goal of all of this is to get to that point. And the Real ID is the first step in getting to that point. Again, they tell you that the difference between a real ID and a current license plate is a check mark. Because that's all the sheeple need to hear. What's the difference? Oh, there's a little check mark on top. So that's how you can tell it's a real ID versus an old license, right? But people don't realize what facial recognition is and what biometrics are. Once you give them your biometrics, you're giving them all access to you. Because once your facial features are stored in this data system, this database, you will be spotted and monitored on every single surveillance camera that's out there. We hear all the stuff with Flock and Amazon and the Amazon Sidewalk, right? Hooking up people's internet to one another's home and then using and accessing your Ring and somebody else's Ring because we're building out the surveillance system for them. And then they're giving access to the surveillance grid in the name of your privacy and your safety because you're saying, I need a Ring because people might steal packages off my porch or somebody might break in because all the propaganda I hear about all these illegals robbing people's homes, so I better get a Ring. And then you build out the surveillance grid for them. And then once you're in a database, every single place you go, say all of a sudden you get on the government's radar. Maybe all of a sudden you start making a YouTube channel. You start posting stuff online. If they type into the system to monitor and track every place you go, they'll be able to. You won't be able to hide because the surveillance grid will be built out and you already have willingly given them your geometric measurements, your face biometrics. That's what they want. And then from there, as society becomes more obsessed with tech, because we already see the teens, we see parents giving phones to 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds. So what do you think the world's going to look like in 20 years, right? We know they already tried to kill off all people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s by telling them to go get vaccinated first. What do you think that was for? They knew they wouldn't take to the vaccine. They know those generations of people are not tech savvy, and they wouldn't be able to go forward with mandating all of this stuff with technology, that everybody does everything with technology because of those generations. So they kill off that generation. And then as time continues to go by, and more generations refuse to resist because they're so dependent on tech and they're trained to think that technology is the greatest thing to ever exist, that it's their best friend, and they actually care more about tech than they do about humans. You think people are going to be resistant to having a blockchain where they say, well, all it is just, we don't have to do a surgical procedure on you, right? Because people hear that now and they're like, oh, a blockchain. I mean, what, they're going to cut my brain open and put it in? No. They'll be able to inject this into your body. You could, like, no different than going to CVS. And there'll be other ways that they could do this as well, I'm sure. But it'll be simple procedure. People go, oh, I don't really care. Then what's the big deal? I don't have to carry a wallet. All my information's in there. And then there'll be stories about human beings. This is what I've been talking about for years. All these stories you constantly hear. Put the radio on. Oh, do you have, my identity was stolen. My identity was stolen. All these stories about data breaches. It's all bull crap. AT&T data breach, Google data breach. These are government companies, okay? They already have all of our data, okay? Some Russian guy isn't hacking it. They're preparing you for these stories about data breaches and personal ID being stolen so that you move forward and accept a digital ID where they tell you don't have to live in fear anymore. Nobody can steal your personal info. And if they create huge psyops about somebody losing everything because some hacker stole all their information, but now with the digital ID, everything can be implanted inside your genetic code, and it's personalized to you, and you don't have to do, nothing anymore. You don't need a check. You don't need a wallet. You don't need a credit card. You don't need a health certificate. You don't need a birth certificate. None of it, right? People will just go, oh, okay. Just like they're going to do now with the Real ID, right? Because they're going to force people into this because people don't want to go to the airport, not only pay $50, which is pretty expensive. You heard in the clip, started as 18, moved to 50, 45 pretty fast because they realize, well, $20 might not hurt them, but let's make it more than double. 45, then you're thinking of a family of four, $200 on top of your plane ticket and all the other nightmare crap you have to pay for at the airport, right? Like, you go to the airport with a bottle of water, now got to throw it out and then rebuy a bottle of water inside of the terminal if you want to bring it on the plane. Can't bring your own snacks or any of this other stuff because the ridiculous rules we allow them to enforce on us. Convenience, right? Oh, they're going to pull you out of line for 30 minutes. Well, who wants that? What does that mean? You got to get to the airport 6 hours before your flight? These are things they're trying to do and implant in your mind so that you just go, fine, I'll get the freaking ID. We have a family vacation coming up. I don't want to deal with the hassle. I'll get it. And then you willingly give up your biometrics to Big Brother. And like I said, it does matter when you're inside of this one ID system. It does. Because again, at any moment in time with the system that they have set up with Flock and everything else, they could just, they could track every movement I make, for example, if I gave in and gave my facial recognition to this system. And they said, okay, we know who this guy is. Let's monitor him 24/7 everywhere he goes. Every time he goes anywhere near an airport, we want to be alerted because we want to see if he's going out of the country, what he's doing, where he's going, what's he buying, right? It's a surveillance grid, and we've built it out for them. And this is just more of them coming in because the data show that nobody was getting a real ID. Nobody was like, oh, I got to go get the real ID. They just got, oh, I'll just use my passport. I'm not interested, And they don't tell you about the biometric aspect of it. And that's the only fact, that's the purpose of the real ID is biometrics. And then we go from there with a real ID to a digital ID. It's a transition phase. Get you in the one system, and eventually the digital ID system is embedded in you via blockchain, which people think is crazy. And I don't expect them not to. When you tell someone this, because it blows your mind how sick it is, how devious it is, how satanic it is. Then you start thinking in terms of the mark of the beast and stuff. You don't want to accept it and think about that. You're like, oh gosh, why do I have to be alive during this? I couldn't have been alive 50 years. I couldn't have been alive in the Little House on the Prairie days. Couldn't have been alive 300 years. Yeah, nobody wants to think about it. And that's why we live in the world we live in. Because you tell them this stuff and they dismiss it. Why do they dismiss it? Because it's hard to accept. Who wants to accept this? Some of you may have children. You want to live in a world where your kids have to live like this? No. So you just go, I can't think about it. I can't. I got to just live data. I got to be happy. I got to try to be positive because it's depressing and it's sick. And the pushback isn't there enough for Big Brother to take a step backwards, right? Because they don't care if you don't travel anymore. Do you think they care? They're already trying to make it so you don't travel. They're already trying to make it so you're fearful of flying because in a new world order, you're not traveling freely. You'll be lucky if they let you travel once a year based on your carbon footprint. So they're going, don't travel. Who cares? It's best for us. We win both ways, right? Right? Oh, okay, fine. Don't go to the airport. And if you go, well, we'll just make it really annoying for you so that you just eventually give in because you don't want to deal with it twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. Next thing you know, you go on say you go on 3 trips. You don't have to go on 3 vacations. Say you got to visit your grandma, your mom, and you got a family of 4. You have 2 kids and a wife or a husband, right? That's $200 extra every time. And does that even go, it's like, okay, that's what? $600. Say then you got to go for work trips a couple of times. It could be another 2. It could be $800. Nobody's got money to throw around like that, and they know that. And they also know that the 30-minute part's going to drive everybody nuts. So they told us that they'd give you the option, right? The Trump administration here, by the way, who MAGA will just turn a blind eye, as they always do, right? If this was Biden, they'd be going nuts. Oh, they turn a blind eye, and they're like, well, just give us the files. And they give you a little file every couple of weeks, and that's all they feast on is government-fed information. Instead of going, paying attention to what they're doing here. They told you that this wasn't going to be mandatory. Most of these people don't know what it has to do with biometrics. And then they go, no, we changed our mind 8 months later, right? Because nobody signed up for this thing. And they go, well, then we're going to have to force them into it because we have to have their biometrics. We have the biometric grid getting built out. The data centers getting built out. Now we need everybody's biometric info inside of one system. And this is how they do it, right? They do it by manipulation and by, this is almost like blackmail. You know what I mean? It's the government threatening you for stuff that they shouldn't have access to, like your facial impressions, right? Your facial geometric measurements, right? If I told you again, like I said earlier, if I told you 10 years ago that you had to give your fingerprint to get a license or something, you'd be like, that's a little ridiculous. Why? I'm not giving that information to the government. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't commit a crime. I don't want to give them that. What if they use that against me? What if they use that to frame me, right? That's my personal fingerprint. Everyone's is different. Oh, you wouldn't have accepted it. Now people are accepting it because they're making it frustrating in the name of convenience. They're going, I don't care. And like I said, 30 years from now, those generations are going to be so desensitized. They're going to be like, what's the big deal? Those people are crazy that were yelling about this stuff. It's technology evolving. No, it's not. It's the government evolving into a new world order. I thank everybody for being here. I hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families as always.